We are living right at the center of the largest financial experiment in human history. And the strange part is this: most of us don't even realize it. Let's take a look around. Public debt, private debt, corporate debt, household debt. All of it combined has reached a point where no civilization in the past has ever carried this much weight. Today, governments borrow trillions of dollars, and no one is surprised anymore. Central banks can create money with a few keystrokes. Families take on 30-year mortgage loans as if they were signing for an ordinary purchase, not committing to decades of debt. And we still talk and think about debt as if it were something natural, harmless, and permanent. But the reality is very different. Throughout history, debt has never been just an economic tool. It has also been a tool of power, a mechanism of control, and very often a quietly rising danger. The real question is not whether today's massive global debt will cause a crisis. The real question is when, and when that day comes, who will pay the price? To understand this, we need to go back a little. Debt is almost as old as civilization itself. The first clay tablets found in Mesopotamia were not poems or sacred texts, as we might imagine. They were records showing who owed whom, and how much. How many sacks of grain? How many animals? In early societies, debt was not just an economic matter, it was a sacred one. Priests and kings oversaw debts, and from time to time there were great jubilees where debts were completely erased to prevent society from falling apart. Just think about that. A world where the financial system was deliberately wiped clean so that society could survive. Ancient rulers understood a very clear truth. Debt is power, yes, but too much of it is destructive. You cannot keep an entire population under debt forever. At some point, the system cracks. Over time, debt changed its form. During the Renaissance, banking families like the Medici and Florence took the stage. Debt was no longer measured in grain and livestock, but in gold and credit. Kings, popes, emperors, everyone borrowed for wars, grand buildings, and imperial dreams. But debt always carried risk. Spain is one of the clearest examples. Despite being flooded with silver from the New World, it declared bankruptcy multiple times in the 16th century, because spending had far exceeded real capacity. So we can say this clearly. Even vaults filled with gold are not protection against debt. Debt was no longer shaping only individuals, but states and entire continents. Wars were financed with debt. Dynasties collapsed because of debt. Maps were redrawn through debt. By the time we reached the 20th century, things began to spiral out of control. After the First World War, countries were left with debts that were nearly impossible to repay. The war reparations imposed on Germany were at levels that even economists of the time called unsustainable. And what happened next? Hyperinflation in the 1920s. Days when people carried wheelbarrows full of banknotes just to buy bread. This wasn't just an economic crisis. It was a trauma that shook society and politics to their core. And it became a key part of the path that led to the Second World War. Once again, debt proved something important. This is not just about numbers. It is about the fate of societies. In 1944, a new world order was built at Bretton Woods. The United States, the victor of the war, held most of the world's gold, and the dollar was placed at the center of the system. Everything began with promises of stability. But this system also meant that the entire world became dependent on the United States. For a while, things worked, until the habit of borrowing took over once again. In the 1960s, with the Vietnam War and rising domestic spending, the U.S. began printing more dollars than it actually had gold to back. Other countries noticed. They started demanding gold. And in 1971, Nixon cut the dollar's link to gold. That was the moment everything changed. Debt no longer had a clear boundary. As long as there was trust, debt could grow without limit. Central banks began steering economies through interest rates, And whenever a problem appeared, the solution was always the same: more debt. The 1980s, debt crises in developing countries, the 2008 financial collapse, all of them were different chapters of the same story. What happened in 2008 showed everyone how fragile a system built on debt really is. And once again the same outcome followed. Large institutions were rescued. The cost was pushed onto ordinary people. After that, debt truly spiraled out of control. Global debt surpassed $300 trillion, several times the size of the world economy. Japan, the United States, Europe, China. Everyone is in debt, but no one really wants to talk about how it will actually be repaid, because debt is psychologically convenient. Raising taxes is hard. Cutting spending is hard. Borrowing, on the other hand, is easy. You push the cost into the future until interest rates rise, and that is exactly what happened after 2022. Debt suddenly became visible. Mortgage payments soared. Government budgets tightened. Companies were shaken. Debt is like a sleeping predator. While it rests, there seems to be no problem. When it wakes up, there is nowhere to run. And yet we are still told that debt is the solution. To students, to families, to countries. The same story every time. But history has shown again and again that this is not a fairy tale. In the end, every debt ends in one of three ways. It is repaid, it is inflated away, or it is acknowledged as unpayable. None of them are painless. And here is the real issue. Debt is not just economics, it is power. Who gets rescued and who pays the price? The answer is usually the same. That is why understanding debt is not just financial knowledge, it is survival knowledge. History tells us this. Debt accumulates, leaders deny it, a crisis arrives, and the system resets. The only thing that changes is whether we are awake inside that cycle, or whether we pay the price without even realizing it. Global debt is not just a number, it is a shadow hanging over our future. If this perspective gave you something new to think about, subscribe. Because history, if you truly listen, whispers the answers.